Why would anyone in this era where we all have the attention span of a Danubian space mold, why would anyone subject themselves to a 3 hour and 45-minute art house experimental science fiction movie, a film which is basically 4 hours of documentary, pseudo-documentary vignettes about people talking to the camera about birds and a mysterious catastrophe and so forth. I mean, why would you do this to yourself? Why would anyone want to? Well, why? Because that movie is called The Falls from 1980, and it is tremendous. It's amazing. It's incredible. I did have to watch it in two, like I broke it off because even in this period, my attention span is also, pretty stressed out these days. So I took a pause in the middle, but I was so glad I watched it. It's amazing. Here are some of the reasons why I think, it's if you like art house science fiction movies or you want something that is definitely outside the range of what you're used to seeing, like this is the other side of the Marvel movie. Right? This is not Star Wars, nothing like that. Maybe a little bit of THX. This is as far out there as it gets in terms of science fiction movie, and it is fantastic. So here is why. It's a movie by Peter Greenaway, and he was very famous. He was mainly known in the 80s and 90s for very elaborate art house murder mysteries, revenge stories, usually very extreme in terms of like very graphically violent with sexual content and stuff like that, but also amazingly elaborate, like strikingly elaborate visually. Peter Greenaway was a visual artist, and he really had this sense of constructing beautiful visuals with layers upon layers upon layers of details. The cook, the thief, the wife, and her lover. That was him. He did Prospero's books. He did, Baby of Macon, notoriously hard movie to watch, but very smart, very elaborate, very beautifully constructed, but very hard movie to watch. Stuff like Pillow Book with Ewan McGregor, like those movies were the ones that made him like a legend. But here he's beginning his career. It's a small budget movie essentially. It feels like a small budget. It feels like it was shot like with a television camera or something like that, or a 16mm camera. Essentially have people talking to the camera and footage of streets and houses and forests, but also strange visual compositions with like light projections and all these things. You have bits of opera. You have it's like a collage essentially of various pieces, and ostensibly the idea is that we are watching government footage of like a commission, an inquiry commission that details the effects of what is called the violent unknown event, the VUE. And the idea is that the movie does not tell us immediately what that is, because it's essentially like a form of found footage movie. The movie takes the premise that the people who are watching it in the universe already know everything that happened, so they don't explain anything. The movie lets you understand bit by bit what happened. It never really tells it. I'll return to that detail at the end because it does something with that. The movie is talking about this violent unknown event, and you have people talking to the camera explaining the effects of this event, and many times they're talking in strange languages that you don't recognize with people translating. And you find out eventually that these languages are one of the effects of the violent unknown event. So something happened, the VUE happened, and one of the effects was that people spontaneously started speaking these languages, and some of them are very widespread, but some of them are known by only one person. Okay, so it's very hard to translate obviously, and they forgot the ability to speak like English, for instance, and they only speak that language and they write poetry in that language and so forth. So the VOE created mutations, all sorts of strange mutations, weird effects, physiological, psychological effects, and eventually you find out that people who suffered from the VOE, the after effects, became immortal. So and you find out like maybe halfway through the movie that this is one of the things that happened, and it's always building up on that. So it becomes like this like this crescendo of absurdity, and it starts off very quaint, like the effects of people talking to the camera like little old ladies, very ordinary people, like plumbers, and but eventually all the things they're describing are so out there and so crazy and so insane and told from such a like a mundane way that it really starts building up, and the effect it produces eventually at the end, the moment you get to the end of it, is you start to realize that it is like a very elaborate both art object and a very elaborate joke, but very subtle, and it's a joke that doesn't tell you the punchline, but it's there. This is a guy, okay, who clearly you can tell the artistry in it. Like, he builds very complex, very elaborate objects. And if you've seen, sometimes you see like videos on YouTube or something like that, where these artists, when you look at like they build sculptures. I saw a guy on YouTube like a couple of days ago. So he built these sculptures, and if you look at it from this angle, it's like a bird, like an owl or whatever. But if you change the angle and you close up, you realize that it's actually like this, deep and this high, and it's like built with, bits of toys and plastic and bubble gum and, tinfoil and whatever. And all these colors, mixed together, and these textures mixed together, so that from this angle, it looks like a real physical bird, but it's an optical illusion, okay, built by playing with space and textures and so forth. And this is exactly what Greenaway does here, except he's also playing with time, obviously, which is, Tarkovsky playing with time. There you go. You realize that the movie is essentially kind of built, like a spiral. And ostensibly what you're seeing is 92 vignettes of people who experienced this event, and are, tens and tens of millions of people who suffered the event, maybe more. And the movie is called The Falls because this is all the people whose last name began with Fall. Okay, like, so it's this segment of the folder. Except all the names, I have to say, this is one of the hints that this is actually like a very elaborate joke. All the names are like super absurd. Gregor Falsansansky or something like that. They're names like that Steve Martin would say if he's trying to invent a name for himself, in a detective movie comedy or something like that. This is the general idea. So all the names begin with Fall, but they're not real names, okay? They're just very strange names. And you have these 92 vignettes in alphabetical order. So Alia Phalanx, she was making the dishes when the VOE happened, and this is what happened to her. And you realize one of the other very strange and very Greenaway things in this movie is that everything has to do with birds, like ornithology. You realize that there is good reason to believe that the violent unknown event, this catastrophic, epoch-shattering event, which caused immortality and mutations and all these languages and millions of other, insanely strange and terrible things, that the birds did it. There's a whole faction of the population that believes that the birds hatched, if you pardon the pun, like the birds hatched this evil plot to create this event. This is like one of the mysteries that is never really resolved. Like, we never find out what happened. But what we do find out is that, okay, you think you're watching this line, this alphabetical line of, Fal, Fali, Falatin, but you realize that one girl is singing opera, at like maybe after 40 minutes you see this one girl and she's singing an opera and she disappeared after the video or something like that. But she's singing opera, but all she's doing is singing one note, always the same note, and you're sing this note like that, right? And like for 4 minutes. But by the end of the movie, that keeps coming back, and it's mixed in with this other vignette and this other vignette, and it builds up like Ravel's Bolero, essentially, or something like that. And not only musically, but thematically and in terms of the characters. And as I said, you realize that this is part of the piece. It was in real life written by Michael Nyman, like a very, very well-known, respected, excellent composer who worked in many of Greenaway's movies. He also did, I think, the score for the piano, but he did the legendary track from Cook, Thief, Wife and Lover, like based on Purcell, but still he was the one who wrote it. Certainly he scored this one, and he wrote the actual opera, and it's kind of minimalist, Steve Reich, that kind of thing. It's just super powerful, super brilliant. And so at the end of the movie, you're hearing this piece and you're seeing all these elements brought together, and you realize that you've been watching this, like I said, this is the way I understood. Like you've been watching, you thought you were watching one story, but actually you've been watching this entire other story. And essentially the 4-hour experience ends and you watch it and you're like, I need to watch this again. Because it's chock full of clues, right? It's jam-packed with subtle hints and jokes. It's funny. It really has, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but it has that Douglas Adams quality, like very intelligent, very absurd humor, and like that Monty Python feel, something of that feel. You have that in there. So you end up with this powerful, very satisfying movie that truly rewards the 4 hours and slightly less, like 4 hours minus 15 minutes, which you spent in its company. And it started out like this very austere, weird thing, but it's joyful. So it's a post-apocalyptic, insane art house movie about possibly killer birds and mutations, but it's like, as I said, a very, very elaborate, artfully done, lovingly done, like puzzle movie. It's like, if you've done jigsaw puzzles, sometimes you have them and you buy a blank box, essentially. So you're doing the puzzle, but you don't have the actual picture, so you don't know what the puzzle is supposed to represent. And sometimes you have, jigsaw puzzles where, if you finish the puzzle, there's a clue to a murder mystery, and the box includes like the murder mystery, and the clue that solves the mystery is on the picture of the jigsaw you're making. So all these varieties of jigsaw puzzles you can buy. So this movie is kind of like, exactly actually, like one of those jigsaw puzzles, except you don't have the pictures, you don't know what it is. You don't have the clue, you don't have the story. And you basically have no information. You have no idea what's happening and what's going on. Okay. But as the pieces are coming together, are being placed, apparently, arbitrarily by Peter Greenaway, you realize the deep intelligence and care and, elaborate, thoughtfulness that went behind the placement of every one of those pieces. And so it ends and it's like wonderful. It's like this incredible experience. So yeah, it takes a long time, but it's amazing. I have chills actually telling you about it. So it's well worth your while. I mean, you have to, be aware it's a 4-hour movie about people, talking about birds, and but it's funny, it's smart, it's incredible, and there's just no other movie like it. And people have tried, like Andy Warhol, he's famous for his, interminable movies of the Empire State Building or whatever. So people have done that. People have done elaborate, constructions. There's this girl, Ulrike something from the 1970s. Art house directors do that, what's his name? Jodorowsky does that. But very often it's either very boring or it's very, self-serving in a way. You feel like the artist is showing you how smart he is. basically, he or she, you know. And this is like the opposite of that. This is someone who's definitely smart and brilliant and talented, but it's almost like he's showing you how smart we all are, all are or can be, and just what we can achieve when we put care in it. And it's yeah, maybe apocalyptic, but it's joyful and funny and hopeful. So yeah, definitely check it out. I was very happy to have watched it. The Falls, Peter Greenaway. That's a good one. See you soon. Keep watching the skies. Take care.